Welcome everyone, Questini here with a discussion about Ikit in Total War Warhammer 3, Immortal Empires, and in this video, I want to talk about the endgame for him. Some of the things to worry about, some of the things to be concerned about. Now this is a follow-up to my previous video. If you're interested on how you can tackle the early game, check that video, but in short, you have a couple of choices in the early game. You can abandon Skaven Light, take the borrow, and then resell the Skaven Light after you've dealt a Mogre, unless you get lucky and he hasn't used his ritual, in which case you don't necessarily have to worry about that. That would give you a very high-level Skaven Blight city. That has its benefits, but here's the thing about that. If you're going to go down that path, building all these structures is going to cost a lot of money that you don't have. Now, from my perspective, that particular pathway is not worth it, simply because, while certainly the high-tier buildings would be very beneficial in terms of unit recruitment and hero recruitment, the cost you're paying for these buildings, as opposed to growing the settlement naturally, even if it takes 60 turns, because that's roughly how long it would take, the cost of that would slow down your entire campaign progress. And the downside is you're surrounded by a lot of hostile factions or potentially hostile factions. You don't really have time to wait, though there's plenty of ways of making money. You could play Ikit in a more passive way where you just hold Skaven Blight, build up, and then expand, and rely on diplomacy to make money, specifically with Grom. But early game situation aside, let's talk about the late game. And we need to talk about the geographic situation. Now, from my perspective, the best thing you can do is obviously take the Atlan Mountains, Land of Assassins, Great Desert Araby. And then you're going to have a choice, a pretty important choice in your campaign. Basically, it is good to take everything all the way to the Black Pyramid and Lagash, and yes, that does mean dealing with Volkmar. In this case, I've gotten a trade agreement with Tic-Tac-Toe in exchange for selling this territory to him. And I've gone even further. The principal decision you're going to have in this campaign is going to boil down to where do you want to expand? Because you can't expand everywhere, not at the same pace. Sure, you can have, like, over here I have 2 full stacks of forces, marching on Athaloran, or rather marching on Ardurfo after killing Orion. You can do so, but I would recommend avoiding the Empire. Not because the Empire isn't worth it, or rather, the Empire isn't worth conquering. Let me be very clear. Like, outside of a couple of provinces, but a lot of the Empire is not worth it. It's better to build undercities in the Empire as opposed to taking it for yourself. That's my personal perspective on that subject, but you can certainly march in the Empire. But keep in mind, long campaign victory conditions, sure, there are some in the Empire. Altdorf, crucially enough, though Grom is doing a great job of taking it. But many of your long-term victory conditions are going to be in other areas. Another thing to understand about what path you're going to take, it's going to also be related to the other legendary lords of the Skaven. So, Tretch, Queek, Clan Pestilent, Clan Eshin. Going into the Empire means you're not going to confederate Queek or Clan Pestilent or Clan Eshin or Clan Rectus, basically. Going into Lustria is a nightmare, but it would give you Skrolk, though Skrolk is not necessarily too important to confederate, and you can gain vision. One of the things that I would say is important in this campaign, regardless of which path you're going to go for, is to get vision with the other Skaven factions. This can be done in several ways. You can send a hero or a lord to Lustria, for instance. That's what I did for Skrolk. You can declare war on a faction that's at war with, like, say, Queek. That's what I did here. And you can eventually get a peace agreement if you just don't fight them, because you will start gaining positive diplomatic relations. Especially if you have... Especially because, one, you have a right that gives you plus 13 diplomatic relations with Skaven. The other thing you do have over here in Skaven Blight is, not that one. I believe there was some... No, I guess I was wrong with respect to that. And never mind on that particular subject. I was pretty mistaken on what the effect would do. But you do have a lore choice in the Gracier, if I can find one particular Gracier, assuming I may have one, yeah. So Gracier can give you Envoy of the Council. Now, Graciers are not particularly great Lord choices, but they can give you that stacking buff of diplomatic relations, which is pretty useful to use. And you can improve your relations. Like, how did I meet Clan Ishin over here? Well, one of the things to understand about Ikit is that he's close enough to some major destinations for Cathayan caravans. And typically, Cathayan factions will end up in a war with Snitch, so you declare war on him through them, and then you get peace agreement, and then you can start rolling towards confederation, potentially. Especially if he loses, which in the long term, the vast majority of times I've seen Snitch lose this campaign. Like, very rarely on Legendary, I'm talking here Legendary, very hard difficulty, do I see Snitch winning. So those are the kind of options. Fraught is a bit of a painful one. Like, actually, of all the Skaven Legendary Lords, getting Vision with Fraught is the most difficult thing, because he's all the way up there, and you don't have an easy way. Yeah, you could send a hero for the entirety of the Empire, really, but it's kind of a hassle. And confederating him is another pack, assuming you can even do so. I would probably recommend in a Skaven campaign to play with the Recruit Defeat the Legendary Lords mod to get these Legendary Lords if they get defeated, because the alternative is, if they do get destroyed, is to go into their starting settlement and spark a rebellion there, so the faction gets revived, and then you get diplomacy, and it's a pretty annoying situation, I gotta say. Would respect that. Anyway, that's one thing to keep in mind with regards to diplomacy and territory. Some of the things to worry about. Victory conditions, like short campaign victory conditions, you just gotta destroy Estalia, Telia, Carcassonne. Telia and Estalia are always gonna be destroyed. As for Carcassonne, you're probably gonna have to do that. And when you do it, like, I would not necessarily rush for it, but you can, and you can sell the territory to Grom and make an alliance with him. Here's the thing about Grom. Of all the Legendary Lords in the game, Grom is really powerful. The reason he loses in many campaigns is because he's surrounded by enemies. The Empire, the Wood Elves, Carcassonne, like Bretonia, multiple Bretonian factions. So he fights them, but eventually loses. But if you help him out just a bit, just enough, he can accomplish incredible things, because he's not quite on Grimgor's ridiculous level, but he's got some really significant power over here in his faction that very few other factions have. And the crucial thing about this is you can literally have him print money for you. So if you help him, like, one of the things I would say, like, if you're going to take Alpha Lorem, and it's easy enough to take Alpha Lorem, it's just like, it's not valuable. Well, it's easy enough to take on one faction, but if you're fighting multiple factions, and more often than not you will, that's where it gets complicated. But Alpha Lorem is just not worth holding. But if you sell it to Grom, then, well, things do absolutely change. Well, the only thing that's worth it in Alpha Lorem is the Oak of Ages, because timber resources, a lot of income benefits. Yeah, but not necessarily something to rush. Another complication in this campaign, and something that's going to define the choices you're going to make, is Belegar. Belegar is incredibly powerful. Like, in a one-on-one fight between you and him, he wins. Simple as that. Like, in a straight-up fight, if he has his ancestral heroes, for whatever reason he's moved them out of his army. I think, actually, I defeated his army, and so he's recruited another one. It's just a tricky army to deal with. And the problem is, even if you defeat Belegar, great, you've just encountered Alpha Lorem, you've encountered Gelt. You want to play your entire campaign fighting against a brick wall, that's your choice. So those are some of the things to go for. I'm not saying it's a bad choice to go for it. I'm just saying it's more difficult, you'll accomplish less, it won't be as rewarding in terms of territory that's valuable in your campaign. On the flip side, however, there is some incredibly valuable territory, because the territory where Scrag starts in is probably one of the best Skaven provinces in the game, because it has pastures which contain food. And food is one of the problems for Skaven campaigns. Okay, that's enough about campaign ideals, let's put it like that. What about armies? What kind of armies should you have in a Skaven campaign as Ikit? Well, for Ikit, you do kind of want a weapon team army, but at the same time, you're probably going to want to keep him moving, so you're unlikely to actually recruit a full weapon team army. So over here, like, I just recruited some warp fire throwers and warp grinders for his army, and then recruited a bunch of night runners and night runners or slings before moving on, and a bunch of heroes like assassin, chieftain, all that good stuff. But obviously Ikit benefits immensely from having a weapon team army, because one, he has a 50% upkeep for that, and on top of that, just his overall playstyle with this, like his particular playstyle does suit it. Not necessarily for his skill line, though he's certainly suitable for that, and he's got like some really good stuff. Like, I would recommend getting Second Wind Serum, because that's pretty good. Replenishment melee defense, yeah, as opposed to armor piercing and unbreakable. Yeah, I think I'm gonna take the regeneration, or replenishment anyway. The main benefit, though, with weapon teams is you've got all of these upgrades over here that are incredibly powerful. So you get things like melee attack, damage resistance for warp grinders. You get regeneration, for instance, expendable, all that. So weapon team armies are great, but I would say weapon team armies are more of a long-term prospect as opposed to an early game one. Like, if you want to play a more passive campaign, just build entire armies of weapon teams, you can do so. Just bear in mind, Rattling Gunners and Jezzails are really crappy in Siege. That's the reason I dislike using them. Warp Grinders are great, though of course you can make Bombardiers and Globadiers and Poison Wind Mortars and dominate with that, but you're going to need to get that. So there's pros and cons with different approaches, but yeah, I do prefer getting Night Runners as quickly as possible in a campaign for a couple of reasons. The only thing they're really vulnerable against are fast-moving units. So Bretonnia actually can counter your army if you're not careful with these guys, whereas Warp Grinders would destroy Bretonnia's cavalry, no problem. But it's not Bretonnia that's the real issue in this campaign. And there's other ways you can deal with that, with spells, with, the few Rattling Gunners and Warp Fire Throwers, no problem. The main issue that you're going to face in a Skaven campaign are ranged units, actually, if you go with the weapon team army, because gunpowder doesn't work very well. So that's where Night Runners and Gut Runners, very fast-moving units that have a good amount of physical resistance, very high speed, Vanguard deployment for these guys, and yeah, with the regular Night Runners, fire while moving, though they have limited ammunition. And then of course you have the upgraded version in things like Gut Runners and Gut Runners with poison. Now the poison is a bit annoying to get because you do need a tier 4 Salmon with Pestilent Knave to get that, the poison upgrade, but the poison upgrade will make these guys really great. It's not the same power that Snitch has. Snitch is focused on this playstyle, but this is one of the main armies you want to use. Or a combination, like over here I have some Jezzails, some Plague Claws, I'm going to get, some Poison Wing Globadiers, Bombardiers, whatever, or, just wait for it. One thing, the Warband upgrade mod is really good for Skaven because there's just units that are natural upgrades to the ones you have, like Gut Runners, the Night Runners, all that kind of stuff. So just a couple of things to mention with regards to modding, if you still want something close to the vanilla experience, but you would want to spice it up. So I would recommend, like, either a weapon team army or a Night Runner army works really well. Other playstyles, not really important for Ikit. Like, I would not go with a Packmaster army or a Monstrous army for him. You can make it work pretty well with like a combination of Rattling Gunners, Warlock Jezzails, some Warp Fire Throwers, and Warp Grinders. So keep in mind, Warp Grinders may seem that they have a good amount of armor, but they're actually more vulnerable than you might think, especially against any kind of ranged units. They will hold their own pretty decently in melee, especially with all the upgrades that Ikit has. So it's kind of funny, you actually technically have the best melee army when you're playing as Ikit of the Skaven. I'm not joking. Like, you can argue, I guess, a fraud, but that's more because of the individual unit customization that can be used with all types of units. It's not something specific, and besides, fraud is more about the monstrous units rather than the infantry. Whereas hilariously, the warp grinders that you do have and the other upgrades that you do have, like an entire doom stack of warp grinders on the Ikit Claw with the various benefits you give them, yeah, that can work exceptionally well. Another thing to also keep in mind with the Forbidden Workshop is that you can also get a couple of special units through this through getting upgrades. So rallying gunners, death dealers, eye takers. So just a couple of special units that add more power to you. So there's a significant level of power over here through that workshop. Just keep in mind something about the workshop. Tier 1 requires you to get the Warpstone Tractor Beam, which requires the Tier 3 Skaven Blade. Then you have to use a Doom Rocket in battle. Tier 2 requires you to get rank 15 with a Warlock Engineer, not a problem, but also rank 15 with a Warlock Master. So your second Lord should be a Warlock Master just to get this objective, because you obviously want to get the Forbidden Workshop as quickly as possible. And then Tier 3 requires you to get the Warpstone Reactor, so there's reasons why you might want to play tall as opposed to playing wide, which is generally the case in my campaigns. Like, that's one of the nice things about Ikit Claw. Like, yeah, you can be a massive expansionist, or you can sit on your ass in Skaven Blight and make that work if you want to. I'm not necessarily fond of that particular playstyle, but it can work. I just hate the intern button simulator, if you will. Hero-wise, well, what do you want me to say? They're all freaking great. But obviously, like, assassins are the most important because they give you replenishment. So having a good amount of assassins, and the thing is, you can get a lot of assassins very quickly because all you need is a tier 2 settlement, no problem. And then chieftains, plenty of those to get, but really, all Skaven heroes can increase capacity very, very easily. You might wonder, well, what about, Plague Priests and Ashen Sorcerers? Well, the capacity might be difficult to increase from settlements. Sure, that's true, because you need a tier 4 settlement to increase capacity, but that's not really the case, honestly, because there's an ancillary that I'm not sure if I have it over here because I'm not really focused on this particular but there is an ancillary which you can get to give you capacity for them. I believe that is available, though I might be wrong. It might be a scroll exclusive thing, could be mistaken on that, but yeah, there's ways to increase capacity for sorcerers. Besides, interesting thing about that capacity situation is you can increase capacity for the Den of Secrets. It does require a tier 4 settlement, but you have two different structures that you do want for only the poison gutter runners that you do want in your campaign that increase capacity. Might require tier 4, might require provincial capitals, but is doable. One of the things to be aware of with Skaven if you're building a massive empire is you're going to have to manage your food. And the problem is the more territory you take, the more your food capacity increases, so it gets harder and harder to increase the tier. So yeah, getting a good supply of food, like food that actually ends up being far more important than money in the long term. You might start using commandments to, generate food, or playing in such a way that you have low Skaven corruption in order to generate food, because that is a viable path as well. It's the same amount of food if you go for it. And given the fact that high Skaven corruption also affects your public order, yeah, I'm probably going to go with the idea that trying to go for low Skaven corruption or non-existent is probably the best way. Like, if you have absolutely no Skaven corruption, you will generate free food, which is actually more than the exploitative planning commandment that you do have there. Keep in mind something with research. There is research in the tree that will increase your food capacity. This is not research that you want to focus on. What do you want to focus on, however? Well, missile resistance during siege battles, pretty useful. Sacking income. One of the things to get, though, is devious plans, but that's going to require a particular structure that you wouldn't necessarily get in a lot of campaigns. I mean, or you wouldn't necessarily prioritize, because it's just reducing recruitment costs by 10%. But it does give you devious plans. So you might just want to get one of these as quickly as possible, because upkeep for Night Runners, God Runners, recruit rank, hero recruit rank for assassins, all of these kind of benefits. Like I would say the bottom tree is particularly useful, though don't underestimate getting like 5% casualty replenishment in your campaign, or post-battle loot, or leadership when laying siege or encircling Skaven, especially given that Skaven have horrible leadership in general. There's a bunch of useful things. There's a bunch of paths, but I would say the most important things are, things like recruit rank and upkeep for Night Runners and Gutter Runners, because Skaven armies, proper Skaven armies, not Skaven slaves and clan rats, can actually cost a good amount. Though you do have a good economy as the Skaven. Just keep in mind the public order situation. Keep in mind when you're taking a province, you're very likely going to face a rebellion when you're doing so. Like over here, a rebellion is, like I just took control of Mount Arcos, very likely going to get a rebellion, though it is only conquest, so I might be able to avoid that. As long as I keep my characters in the province, I might be able to avoid that, but it is a constant management. I would recommend getting a lot of these Masters platforms. Never take minor settlements unless you really want to and you have a lot of food and you don't know what to do with it. But never spend your food at taking minor settlements at a higher level. You have good growth, so there's no reason to bother with that. Instead, take provincial capitals, especially something like the Black Pyramid of Nagash, or settlements that have a landmark. That's actually worth taking. Though, in this case, yeah, I know there's some food here. Should probably get that as quickly as possible, right? Just been focused on a lot of things. Now, a lot of people hate the Skaven, and you might think, oh, playing the Skaven is about screwing other people over. Surprisingly not, because this may come as a surprise to people, but Skaven can actually generate a huge amount of money through trading. Yes, this is one of the issues in the Skaven campaign, that a lot of people hate you, but you need to trade with them, because look at this, like it's turn 42, I'm generating 28,000, so almost a third of my income, well, not quite a third, a quarter of my income is from trade. Everything else from building income. So actually having good, reliable trading partners and not screwing yourself over in terms of reliability is useful. Taking settlements to sell the AI, very useful. You might have some unlikely alliances, so to speak, like over here, for instance. I provoked a war between Tic-Tac-Toe and Krokar, so it's like my entire southern flank in this situation is secure. I took the Golden Tower, sold it to Tic-Tac-Toe, asked him to go to war with Krokar after I did that. Yeah, that's how you play the Skaven. Like, there's a saying I do have over here in that everyone's playing Skaven. Like, if you're playing a Warhammer free campaign, you're kind of playing Skaven in terms of manipulating the diplomacy thing. Just don't backstab. Like, your reliability level is important. Another thing I want to mention about armies, Plague Claws are really good, especially in knocking down walls. 2 to 4 Plague Claws in our army for sieges, especially, really, really good. You might say, oh, you can use stealth. Yeah, I'm not fond of that particular playstyle, to say the least, with respect to that. In terms of building up your settlements, you're going to have... It is a balancing act between increasing hero capacity for assassins and chieftains in particular, but also building up your economy, because these buildings are not going to generate as much money as growth buildings, controlled buildings, all that. Also, building potentially multiple controlled buildings, because you're going to face a constant swarm of rebellions. Like over here, I have tier 3 1. Still going to face a rebellion here if I don't do anything. So, likely going to get another controlled building once this is finished, or when I get the opportunity for that. Or I could just switch the commandment, right? Though, generally speaking, with the commandment, I do prefer expansionist planning, because 20 growth is quite significant. Though, keep in mind, you get a decent amount of growth through regular structures. That's key about growth for every faction. it's tied to the main settlement buildings. Skaven do get more than other factions. Not Bretonnian or Greenskin level, but it's decent enough. It will get the job done. It starts at 12, goes to 24, 36, 48, and 60. Again, Bretonnia has more, which is absurd, but take what you will of that situation. One important thing, if you're playing Skaven, you want full control of entire provinces, not just one settlement or something like that. And ideally, you want provinces with 3 settlements in them. The reason for it is because the main way you generate money is getting a bunch of structures that each generate money, and then getting warp lightning capacitors into the warpstone reactor building that boosts the income by 50%. That's how you generate money. That's one of the problems with Skaven Blight. That's one of the limiting factors, if you will, about Skaven Blight, and that limits its potential as a settlement, if you will. Another thing to also mention about the Skaven is that one of the most powerful things you actually have as the Skaven is the Pestilence Scheme. This is a really, really powerful ability, a powerful right. It has a 30-turn cooldown, but that Plague Priest that you summon, that Plague is the most powerful plague in the game. I laugh at playing against Nurgle because there's virtually no plague that they can use against me, or none that they do use against me, that actually hinders my campaign. The Skaven plague does hinder your campaign, and it actually screws over the AI as well in a significant manner, because not only will any army that has that plague will take a significant amount of attrition, to the point that it actually hurts the AI as well, though not as much as it will hurt you, but it reduces the income and growth by an enormous amount, and it spreads like wildfire. So actually getting access to the Pestilence Scheme early on as Ikit could really help you out against all these factions. Just bear in mind something about that. Like with many things with Skaven, it can blow up in your face. If you're going to use the Plague, make sure you're using it far in enemy territory, or in the territory of factions that you're not necessarily attacking at a point, but that you know they're going to be a problem. So yeah, unleash it in the middle of Avalorian if you want to, though that might be too close to Comforter, or unleash it on Altdorf. Just be careful about unleashing it on the front line, because then you'll get it. In fact, this is what canonically happened with the Skaven when they tried to take over the Empire. It's kind of hilarious that the Empire denies the Skaven exist when, they almost lost everything to the Skaven. But the Skaven unleashed a plague against the Empire, and then the Skaven army got affected by that plague, and their armies got decimated. Skaven things in the lore. But regardless, those are some of the things to understand. Which path do I think you should go for? I feel like going for the Badlands, going for the Darklands eventually, going for Nagashasar, because you won't take it as a tier 5. That's not important, but going for this particular territory is probably your best bet, because Queek and Tretch, yes, Tretch is useless, but he's still a legendary lord. He still has some value, quote-unquote. Queek certainly has value. He's an absolute monster hero and lord killer. And then eventually you might even, if you end up over here, for instance, you could use this pathway to get over here to Tretch and confederate him. Basically, you're going towards China as well. Yeah, it's worth it. Or you could get lucky and confederate clan Eshin for diplomacy. Though if you could confederate one of the minor Skaven factions that are either in Lustria or Cathay, that would be great, because that would give you territory that you could then sell to other factions and really establish, or build an entire army over there to, help some people out, like Snitch, which would in turn open up diplomatic choices in your campaign. That's all there is to say. And yeah, the nuke's incredibly powerful. Try and have 1 or 2 nukes all the time. Don't use them unless you absolutely have to. I mean, you do have to early on, right, for the sake of your objective. Just remember, you do need tier 3 Skaven Blight, so you don't have to use the nuke as quickly as possible. You won't get the rewards until you've completed all of the objectives. That's all I had to say. Stay tuned for more, and I'll see you next time.